Hi, I'm Jan Wegener and welcome back to the Early Bird Photo News. This week we got a few exciting topics to cover, including a potential Nikon APS-C crop camera, Canon telephoto lenses with built-in teleconverters, and I discovered a brand new way to ruin my images. Yesterday I was reminded that we often ignore what's right in front of us. I've known about a certain spot for years but never visited it, and it's only 8 minutes from my house. After seeing a post online, I remembered that there was actually a species of duck at that spot that I'd never photographed before, so I decided to finally give it a go. To my delight, I not only found a few cotton pygmy geese, but also the comb-crested jacanas walking through the weeds on their ginormous feet. The conditions weren't ideal, heavy showers and grey skies, but I actually enjoy those conditions because they allow me to shoot in all directions rather than having to worry where the sun is. Interestingly, my best image came during the heaviest rain. The showers created a beautiful soft haze across the lake, adding an interesting mood to the image. One thing we all know by now is that when we photograph waterbirds, we should get as low as possible. But what many photographers don't realize is what a profound difference even 3 inches can make. Here's the first image taken with the tripod in the water and just the tripod head peeking out maybe 3 or 4 inches above the water. And here's the second image where I rested the lens foot on a log in the water, basically placing the lens as low as possible. And the difference between the 2 images is quite dramatic. The first image is still good, but the lower angle in the second shot allows us to include more of the distant background, creating a lot more depth and separation. And we can also completely change the colors in our image and remove some of the bright highlights from the water. Right at the start of the shoot, I ran into something strange. Suddenly the edges of my images started to look soft and murky, almost as if I was shooting through a tunnel. At first I thought the lens had fogged up, but when I checked it, it was fine. But then after further investigation I realized what had happened. While filming, the sensor of my R5 Mark II was generating enough heat that it actually affected the backside of my teleconverter and starting to fog that up. Unfortunately, the only solution to this issue was taking the camera off, kind of waving some air at the teleconverter and waiting for the fog to disappear, which definitely wasn't ideal in heavy rain. This problem kept reappearing for about 15 to 20 minutes until the teleconverter had finally warmed up enough that it wasn't happening anymore. Have you ever experienced something similar? Last week I mentioned that one of the primary reasons that I still shoot Canon is the autofocus. And yesterday I got another great example from the lake for you. I was using the R5 Mark II with the 2x teleconverter, and in the whole area autofocus mode it had no problem to lock onto several different targets across the lake and sticking to them without ever jumping onto the water. And that's definitely something a lot of other systems still seem to struggle with a fair bit. What would have definitely helped at this location though was built-in teleconverters. I would have loved to take some shots of the geese in flight, but shooting close to the water it's just impossible to track them, and to be able to actually do a bird in flight shot for instance, I had to rip the lens out of the water, take the teleconverter off, put the camera back on, and then try to find the bird and still photograph it. And by the time I was done with that, the birds were basically already gone. That's why I was excited this week to read that Canon rumors thinks that Canon is actively working on launching new super telephoto lenses with built-in 1.4 teleconverters. Nikon users have enjoyed this feature for years, and I'd love to see Canon finally follow suit. What I would find even more exciting than a built-in 1.4 extender though would be the ability to have a 1.4 and 2x extender available with the switch of a button. Now whether that's built into the lens directly or through a separate teleconverter unit doesn't really matter, but that would be a true game changer. In the past we've seen patents and rumors that Canon was working on a sort of teleconverter unit that would have no teleconverter, 1.4 and 2x teleconverter option, and if they could build that, I think that would be truly amazing and definitely something a lot of us would want to get. My biggest wish for new 400 and 600mm RF prime lenses is so that Canon can make them shorter. Both the Sony and Nikon versions are noticeably shorter than the Canon ones, which makes it much easier to put them in a backpack. Another issue that I would love to see Canon address is the image stabilization behavior we currently see in the EF version 3 and the RF 400 and 600mm super telephoto lenses. When mounted on a tripod, the image stabilization in these lenses often never fully settles down and giving us micro movement in the shots, which is definitely super annoying. And no other Canon lens does this, so I really want to see that go. Canon rumors also reported that Canon might still see room for RF 500mm prime lens as well. But this wouldn't be a typical f4 500mm prime lens, but rather something smaller like a 5.6 500mm lens. And I think that would be a fantastic addition to the lineup. Even though if I can be super picky here, I would probably prefer that lens to be small and light and with 600mm rather than 500mm. In the past, Nikon had a great 500mm PF lens, but then they made a 600mm PF lens, which I just enjoy a little bit more in the field. Speaking of Canon, they also pulled the new firmware 1.3 for the Canon R5 Mark II and replaced it with firmware 1.3.1 after users reported some issues. And that's exactly the reason why I always say I don't install new firmwares right away and usually wait a few weeks or sometimes even months to make sure that all the issues are sorted out. Over the years, all manufacturers simply had too many issues with new firmware releases that sometimes crippled the cameras dramatically, so I like to take the wait and see approach. In saying that though, I used the new firmware yesterday on the R5 Mark II, and even in the tough rainy conditions, the camera worked pretty flawlessly. Are your images softer than what they should be? Is your autofocus missing the target? Or do your edits just never quite turn out the way you wanted? That usually comes down to two things: camera settings and editing skills. I cover exactly how to set up your camera properly in my Canon, Nikon and Sony setup guides linked below. But taking great RAW files is only the first step. You also need to know how to transform them into final images you can be proud of and share with the world. And to help you to achieve outstanding results fast, I developed my next generation Photoshop and Lightroom masterclasses. In the classes, you will learn my easy-to-follow step-by-step workflow, teaching you the tools and techniques that actually make a difference and fast-track your results. But of course, you won't just be watching, because I'm also providing you with my own RAW files so you can edit right alongside me. Whether you're just starting out or already an experienced photographer, my masterclasses are designed to elevate your results immediately and turn editing from a frustrating chore into an enjoyable experience. And if you're unsure if my guides and masterclasses truly make a difference, check out the hundreds of reviews from happy students who have used them to dial in their camera settings, transform the editing, and get great results they're truly proud of. So if you finally want to master image editing and get the best possible performance from your own camera, my setup guides and masterclasses are linked for you down below. I know they will help you a lot. Now let's move over to Nikon. If you're a Mac user, you'll be happy to hear that with the latest operating system, you'll now be able to open the high-efficiency star RAW files directly in the Finder, which should make it a lot easier to find certain files. And if you've never shot high-efficiency star RAW on the Nikon cameras like a Z8 for instance, I would definitely recommend it. The file sizes are a lot smaller and the image quality is basically the same, and you get a much bigger buffer for action. So basically no downside with a lot of upside. Nikon Rumors also posted the first few images of the 120 to 300mm TC lens out in the wild at a few sporting events. And that can only mean one thing, that Nikon is basically in the final stages of testing that lens now in the real world to get some feedback from pros using it, and then hopefully releasing it officially to the public very soon as well. And by that time, I'm also very hopeful that I will have used the lens and made a video for all of you guys. Nikon also discontinued a few cameras and lenses, most noticeably the 24 to 70 f2.8 and the 70 to 200 f2.8 version 1 lenses. Now both lenses already have a version 2 successor, so that makes a lot of sense. What's more interesting though is that Nikon also replaced the F to Z adapter now with a new version. And I couldn't really find any information on it, what it changes and if it's actually better than the current one. So if you're currently adapting an F mount lens to the Z mount, this might be worth keeping an eye on and finding out whether you might be better off buying the new adapter. Nikon also released a new firmware for the 70 to 200 f2.8 version 2 lens that apparently had some issues when working with the 2x teleconverter. The most interesting Nikon rumor this week wasn't about the lens though. It was about the future relationship between Nikon and RED cameras. My friend Matt Urban on his YouTube channel highlighted an interview of the Nikon development team and the RED development team and how they plan to work together in the future. And one comment in particular caught my attention. Because unlike Nikon, over the years RED cameras have made their own sensors, including some very fast global shutter ones. And now imagine those finding their way into a D500 mirrorless style camera. For wildlife, that would definitely be super interesting. If Nikon had a great mid-level APS-C camera to combine with their already great lineup of relatively light wildlife lenses, I think that's something a lot of wildlife shooters would find very hard to resist, and I think it would also put them firmly ahead of Sony and even Canon. What do you think? Could we actually see a successor to the D500? To be honest, I'm almost surprised that Nikon hasn't done one already. and if the Z500 would come out relatively soon, it might even push Canon a little bit harder to finally give us that R7 Mark II that we've all been waiting for. Speaking of the R7 Mark II, Canon Rumors also posted an article explaining why they think the R7 Mark II has been delayed into sometime early next year. One suggestion was that Canon wanted to prioritize cameras using the R6 Mark III sensor before turning their attention to APS-C bodies. And now we've already seen that sensor included into 3 cameras, and it will potentially be also included in the upcoming R8 Mark II, so I would say mission accomplished. Let's move on to the R7 II, hey? However, at least currently, neither Sony nor Nikon put a lot of emphasis on the APS-C sector, so Canon might not feel a lot of urgency to actually bring out that camera. I also wonder though whether rising memory prices will make it hard in the future to build entry to mid-level cameras still profitably. Before I go, I have a few questions that I would love to hear your answers to down there in the comments. First of all, what's your primary editing software and what made you choose it? Is it Photoshop, Lightroom, Photolab, something completely different? And now even DaVinci Resolve has added photo editing to their video software, which is something I might be looking into in the future. And secondly, if you're using a GoPro Insta360 or DJI action camera, what are your experiences with them and would you buy them again? I'm looking for 1 or 2 of these cameras to film myself and also to use for underwater filming when I'm going snorkeling, for instance. So if you have one of these cameras, let me know your experiences with them. And if you know anyone working for one of those companies, let them know that I'd be keen to test some of them out. And while we're at it, can you guys actually recommend some good noise cancelling headphones? I'm definitely due for a new pair. And that brings me to the end of this week's Early Bird Photo News. I'm looking forward to reading all your comments. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a thumbs up, and I would greatly appreciate if you also hit that subscribe button. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!